You've started noticing something shifting inside you, a hardness where there used to be softness, a calculating stillness where there used to be reactive chaos. People are treating you differently, but they can't quite articulate why. They're more careful with their words around you, more measured in their disrespect, more aware that you're no longer the person they could casually manipulate or dismiss. This transformation isn't something you announced or performed. It happened quietly, in the private moments when you stopped explaining yourself, stopped seeking approval, stopped believing that niceness was a strategy that served you. Danger isn't about violence or aggression. It's about becoming someone whose boundaries are non-negotiable, whose time has value, whose respect must be earned rather than assumed. It's about evolving past the desperate need to be liked into the sovereign state of being effective. And if you're reading these signs in yourself, if you recognize this evolution taking place beneath your conscious awareness, then you're experiencing something most men never achieve: the transition from harmless to formidable, from reactive to strategic, from victim of circumstance to architect of outcome. The death of your need for external validation. Something fundamental dies inside a man when he stops needing other people to confirm his worth. It's not a dramatic death, not a theatrical renunciation. It's a quiet erosion of the mechanisms that once made him contort himself into acceptable shapes, that made him soften his edges to fit into spaces that were never designed for him. When this need dies, when the desperate hunger for approval finally starves out, a dangerous clarity emerges. You stop moderating your truth to make others comfortable. You stop shrinking your ambitions to seem humble. You stop apologizing for taking up space or demanding what you've earned. The psychology of this shift involves a fundamental rewiring of your reward system. For most of your life, the brain has been conditioned to seek validation from external sources, to experience pleasure when others approve and pain when they disapprove. This conditioning runs deep because it served an evolutionary purpose. Social acceptance meant survival. But in modern context, this hardwiring becomes a vulnerability that others exploit. They learn they can control you through approval and disapproval, that they can shape your behavior by strategically dispensing or withholding validation. When you finally sever this dependency, when you relocate your sense of worth from external opinion to internal standards, you become ungovernable in ways that frighten people accustomed to using approval as leverage. They can no longer manipulate you with praise or punishment. They can no longer predict your behavior based on what will make you popular or accepted. You start making decisions based on effectiveness rather than palatability, based on long-term results rather than short-term social comfort. This evolution creates a particular kind of loneliness that must be endured. When you stop performing for validation, some relationships reveal themselves as transactional arrangements rather than genuine connections. People who were drawn to your pliability, your eagerness to please, your malleability drift away when you become solid and unyielding. This loss is painful but necessary. It clears space for relationships based on mutual respect rather than your utility or compliance. The dangerous man recognizes that seeking validation is fundamentally giving others power over his internal state, his decisions, his trajectory. It's volunteering for a form of psychological slavery where his emotional equilibrium depends on the opinions and reactions of people who often don't have his best interests at heart. When he breaks these chains, when he becomes the sole arbiter of his worth, he gains a sovereignty that cannot be taken or bargained away. This sovereignty radiates in ways that shift how people approach him, how they calculate whether to challenge him, how they assess the cost of disrespecting him. Strategic silence becomes your default mode. The transformation from constant explanation to strategic silence marks a profound shift in power dynamics. Where you once felt compelled to justify your decisions, defend your choices, explain your reasoning to anyone who questioned you, you now understand that explanation is often a form of submission. It's allowing others to put you on trial, to judge whether your logic meets their standards, to position themselves as authorities over your life. The dangerous man recognizes that he owes no one his reasoning unless they've earned that access through demonstrated respect and aligned interests. This silence is not the silence of having nothing to say. It's the silence of choosing not to say it because the audience hasn't earned the privilege of your internal world. It's understanding that words are strategic resources to be deployed with intention rather than reflexive offerings to fill uncomfortable pauses or satisfy others' curiosity. When people press you for explanations and encounter only calm, unmoved silence, they experience a disorientation that reveals their lack of actual authority over you. The psychology here involves embracing the discomfort that silence creates while recognizing that this discomfort is a feature, not a bug. Most people cannot tolerate silence. They will fill it, often revealing more than they intended, often exposing their true motivations and concerns. By maintaining silence, you create a space where others betray themselves while you remain opaque and protected. You gather information while giving none. You maintain mystery while they strip away their own. Strategic silence also conserves your energy in profound ways. Every explanation is an expenditure of mental and emotional resources. Every justification is an acknowledgement that someone else's judgment matters. Every defense is an acceptance of their framing and their right to prosecute you. When you stop engaging in these transactions, you reclaim vast amounts of energy previously wasted on managing others' perceptions and opinions. This shift toward silence often triggers anxiety in people around you because your silence forces them to confront the fact that they don't control you, don't fully understand you, cannot reliably predict you. This anxiety makes them more careful, more respectful, more aware that crossing you carries uncertain costs. They can no longer assume they know how you'll react or what your limits are. This uncertainty is the foundation of the respect that you no longer beg for, but now command through simple unwillingness to explain yourself to those who haven't earned explanation. Emotional reactions no longer dictate your responses. The gap between feeling and action becomes the measure of a dangerous man. Where once emotions immediately translated into reactions, anger into outbursts, hurt into retaliation, fear into retreat, there now exists a space of deliberation. You feel everything as intensely as before, perhaps more intensely because you're no longer numbing yourself or dissociating from uncomfortable emotions. But those feelings no longer hijack your behavior. They become information to consider rather than commands to obey. This mastery over the stimulus-response pattern represents a fundamental evolution in consciousness. The primitive brain wants immediate reaction. It wants to fight when threatened, flee when afraid, freeze when overwhelmed. These impulses served survival in ancestral environments but become liabilities in complex social and strategic situations. The dangerous man has trained himself to pause between stimulus and response, to create space where choice lives. In this space, he evaluates, is this reaction strategically sound? Does it serve my long-term interests? Am I being manipulated into this emotional state to produce a predictable response? What does my opponent want me to do, and what unexpected alternative might serve me better? These questions cannot be asked in the heat of reactive emotion. They require the cool assessment that comes from observing your emotions rather than being consumed by them. The psychology of this detachment is often misunderstood as coldness or lack of feeling. In reality, it's the opposite. It requires deep emotional awareness to recognize what you're feeling and consciously choose not to let those feelings control you. It requires strength to feel anger and choose measured response, to feel fear and choose strategic advancement, to feel hurt and choose dignified silence. Reactivity is easy. Emotional control under pressure is the work of years. This evolution makes you dangerous because you become unpredictable in a specific way. People can still read that they've affected you, that they've triggered anger or fear or hurt, but they can no longer predict what you'll do with those feelings. You might respond immediately, or you might file the information away for later use. You might address it directly, or you might let it pass without acknowledgement. This unpredictability in response disrupts their ability to manipulate you through emotional provocation. You've stopped participating in your own diminishment. There's a particular moment in a man's evolution when he recognizes his own complicity in how others treat him. He sees clearly how his need to be liked led him to laugh at jokes at his own expense, how his desire to avoid conflict led him to accept disrespect without consequence, how his fear of being seen as difficult led him to accommodate people who never accommodated him. This recognition is devastating and liberating simultaneously. Devastating because it reveals years of self-betrayal. Liberating because it identifies the exact mechanism that can be changed. The dangerous man stops participating in his own diminishment in countless small ways that accumulate into a completely different presence. He doesn't laugh when someone disrespects him, even as a social lubricant, even to ease tension. He doesn't accept interruptions or talking over. He doesn't pretend not to notice slights or provocations. He doesn't minimize his accomplishments to make others comfortable. He doesn't defer to loudness or aggression or social pressure when he knows he's right. This refusal creates immediate social friction because many social dynamics depend on certain people accepting subordinate positions. When you stop playing that role, when you refuse to be the person others can casually disrespect or dismiss, the entire social structure must reorganize around your new boundaries. Some people will resist this reorganization violently because your refusal to accept diminishment challenges their sense of hierarchy and entitlement. The psychology of enforcing these boundaries requires tolerating others' discomfort and even anger at your refusal to remain in the subordinate position they assigned you. It requires understanding that their displeasure at your boundaries is their problem, not yours. It requires accepting that some relationships will end because they were built entirely on your willingness to accept less than equal treatment. This stance is dangerous because it announces that you value yourself enough to enforce standards for how you're treated. It communicates that disrespecting you carries costs, that your boundaries are not negotiable, that you will remove yourself from situations or relationships that require your diminishment. This self-respect is threatening to people who benefited from its absence and inspiring to people who recognize its rarity. You've developed comfort with being misunderstood. The desperate need to be understood correctly, to have your intentions recognized, to ensure people don't have the wrong idea about you, this need is a chain that keeps most men imprisoned. They exhaust themselves explaining, clarifying, defending against misinterpretation. They cannot rest while someone somewhere has an incorrect understanding of their character or motivations. This compulsion makes them controllable because others learn they can be manipulated through strategic misunderstanding. The dangerous man has made peace with being misunderstood. He recognizes that other people's narratives about him are their constructions, their projections, their stories that often serve their emotional needs rather than reflect reality. He understands that no amount of explanation will change the mind of someone whose misunderstanding serves a purpose for them. So he stops trying. He lets people believe what they need to believe, while he focuses on reality rather than perception. This comfort with misunderstanding creates a psychological fortress. People cannot bait you into defending yourself against false accusations or mischaracterizations. They cannot manipulate you through the threat of being seen incorrectly. They cannot leverage your need to be understood against your strategic interests. You become someone who cares more about actual outcomes than about the stories people tell about those outcomes. The psychology here involves distinguishing between your reputation among people whose opinions matter and your reputation among everyone else. The dangerous man cultivates respect among the former while accepting that the latter will often misunderstand or mischaracterize him. He doesn't waste energy managing perceptions across the board. He's strategic about whose understanding he invests in and whose misunderstanding he simply tolerates as the cost of operating effectively. This evolution is particularly dangerous to people who rely on shame and social pressure as control mechanisms. When you don't care if they misunderstand you, when you don't need them to see you correctly, they lose a primary lever for influencing your behavior. You can make unpopular decisions without being paralyzed by concern about how they'll be perceived. You can take necessary actions without needing everyone to approve of your reasoning. Your absence has become more powerful than your presence. Something shifts fundamentally when a man realizes that removing his attention, his time, his energy from situations and people creates more impact than any argument or confrontation ever could. The dangerous man has learned that his presence is a resource, that access to him is a privilege, that his engagement has value. When he withdraws these things, when he simply stops being available, stops investing energy, stops participating, the vacuum created often accomplishes what force never could. This understanding changes how you handle conflict and disrespect. Instead of engaging, instead of fighting, instead of trying to change minds or win arguments, you simply remove yourself. You don't announce it dramatically. You don't issue ultimatums or demands. You just quietly redirect your energy elsewhere, and your absence speaks volumes that your presence never could. People who took your engagement for granted suddenly notice its absence. People who thought they could disrespect you without consequence discover that the consequence is simply that you're no longer there. The psychology of this power involves recognizing that many relationships and interactions are sustained by your disproportionate investment. You're the one reaching out, the one making effort, the one extending energy and attention. When you stop, when you redistribute that investment toward people and pursuits that reciprocate, the imbalance becomes obvious. Some people will increase their investment to maintain the connection, revealing that they valued you more than their behavior suggested. Others will let the relationship dissolve, revealing that it was never mutual to begin with. This strategic use of absence requires emotional discipline because it means accepting that some people won't pursue you, won't increase their investment, won't value you enough to chase your withdrawn attention. It requires tolerating the loss of connections that felt important even when they were unbalanced. It requires trusting that the space created by removing these draining relationships will be filled by better ones or by productive solitude. The dangerous man understands that his time and attention are finite resources that should be invested where they generate returns. When interactions become net negatives, when relationships are sustained only by his effort, when people take more than they give, he withdraws his investment without guilt or explanation. This ruthless resource management makes him dangerous because he cannot be held hostage by sunk costs or by others' expectations of his continued availability despite their poor treatment. You've stopped seeking permission for your ambitions. The final and most profound shift occurs when a man stops asking the world if his dreams are acceptable, if his ambitions are realistic, if his goals meet with approval from people who haven't achieved what he's attempting. The dangerous man has internalized that permission is something you give yourself, not something you wait to receive from others. He understands that people who are satisfied with mediocrity will always counsel against excellence, that people who chose safety will always argue against risk, that people who gave up will always provide reasons why you should too. This autonomy in ambition means he no longer moderates his goals to seem reasonable or humble. He no longer shrinks his vision to match others' limited imagination. He no longer seeks validation before pursuing what calls to him. He simply decides what he wants and begins moving toward it, adjusting course based on results rather than opinions. This self-authorization is threatening because it challenges the unspoken social contract that says you should stay in your lane, know your place, accept the limits that others have accepted. The psychology of this independence involves divorcing your ambitions from external approval or permission. It means being willing to be seen as delusional, arrogant, or unrealistic by people whose vision is too limited to encompass yours. It means understanding that extraordinary achievement almost always looks impossible from the outside until it's accomplished, at which point everyone claims they knew it was possible all along. This stance is dangerous because it makes you immune to the limiting beliefs and risk aversion of others. They cannot talk you out of pursuing what matters to you. They cannot convince you to settle or give up through their skepticism or discouragement. They cannot use mockery or doubt as weapons to keep you contained. You've granted yourself permission to attempt what you choose, and their opinions about whether you should are simply irrelevant to your decision-making process. The dangerous man pursues his ambitions with a focused intensity that doesn't require external cheerleading or validation. He's comfortable being misunderstood as foolish while he works, comfortable with others' doubt, comfortable attempting things that might fail. This comfort with disapproval in service of personal vision is perhaps the most dangerous quality of all, because it makes him truly autonomous, truly ungovernable, truly operating from internal direction rather than external control.